Thank you so much for that lovely introduction there, Vikas. That was amazing. And hello to all the participants today. I am going to take a second and just share my slides so that we can all see the content, which I'm sure you can now all see those popping up on your screen. So without much further ado, let's get straight into it. So yes, my name is Aaron Bugle. I'm a field CTO here at Sophos, and I've only been a CTO for a short period of time, but I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot in my 20 years in the information security business. And this presentation today, we're going to be looking at our Active Adversary Report for Business Leaders 2023. And it's an insight into our own incident response services that we provide to not only Sophos customers, but also other people that are not Sophos customers, organizations that have unfortunately fallen victim to cybercrime and need help with some form of recovery. So this particular presentation is going to be utilizing the information from our Active Adversary Report for Business Leaders. Now, this report is available as just a simple web page online. That QR code that you see on the right there will take you directly to this report for you to read. If you don't trust the QR code, I understand. I did make it myself. It is trustworthy, but we can send you a link a little bit later. So all of the data, all the data points and some of the anecdotal sort of feedback from our customers is inside of this report. It's a high level sort of insight to not just a thought on whether or not the industry is having a bad time or not. Just to reiterate, these are from incidents that we've responded to, actual customers and non-customers alike that have had security breaches that we've learned a lot from, and through degeneralizing the data, we can't name names, and trying to keep things fairly sort of vanilla from anything that might have been very obvious about who it was, we've had to take out of the report, but the findings have been pretty interesting nonetheless. The unfortunate thing is, though, that organizations are still falling victims to cybercrime. People are still getting quote unquote hacked, and they're finding that things are pretty bad. And I put this up on big letters in the screen because not that I'm assuming that anybody on this call is this way at all, but some of the organizations that were involved in this data set that we're about to look at, there were some pretty big security misses. There were things that they were totally oblivious to, and some in the industry would call that a little bit of complacency, even being negligent when it came to running a secure organization and business. And what I mean by that, simple things that had been missed, basic security hygiene, which unfortunately led them to becoming a victim of cybercrime. So it's not so much if it'll happen to those organizations, was a matter of when for most of them, but let's sort of dive into some of the details and explore from there. Now, this might shock you, but this report only focused on 152 cases from 2022. Now, that's one every 2 days. Now, there are a lot more cases that we responded to, but in some cases they were from very, very odd cases. They were very large organizations, or they had some very interesting TTPs associated with them that just were just a little bit too telling about what or who the attacker was or who the victims were. So we've handpicked 152 cases from this particular report. And there's a couple of interesting statistics that Rapid Response highlighted to us today. 81% of those organizations had fewer than 1,000 employees. Now, interestingly enough, we would sort of assume in this day and age, when we're a larger organization, I know a lot of the organizations over in India, for example, have many, many more employees than 1,000. But I'm just curious, and maybe this is something that you can all think around yourselves, is does your organization, as it get larger, have more people attributed to the security practitioner field? Do you have more information security analysts, more incident responders, threat hunters? Do you have more people in your organization dedicated to information security as your organization grows? And interestingly enough, we saw that 50% of the cases that we were looking at during this report, they had fewer than 250 employees. Now, in my part of the world, in Australia and some parts of Southeast Asia, small businesses make up the bulk of what we do day in, day out. They're the people that we deal with the most, and they're thriving small businesses. Now, aside of the economic times and all that, they are still required to implement the correct security controls, or just the necessary security controls, so that their business doesn't become a victim. Unfortunately, a lot of these organizations, even at this smaller end of town, were subjected to the same level of impact that many of our larger organizations that we unfortunately had to help experienced as well. So a little bit of food for thought. It doesn't matter how big or how small you are. The moral of the story here is that anybody is just ripe as enough of a target as the next person in line. Now, what was the attack types? What did we actually see unfold into our unfortunate victims' environments once an attacker was able to gain access? Well, it wouldn't be a Sophos presentation, and I'm going to get it out of the way quite quickly if we don't speak about ransomware. And yeah, ransomware is a top performer here. Over 2/3, more than 2/3, in fact, of the organizations that made up this data set did have some form of ransomware deployed in their environment. Now, we're not going to go into attribution too much today about which ransomware operator is doing the rounds, but if anything has sort of told me over the last few years is that as ransomware operators come and then eventually go, something else will pop back into its place. I guess from my own anecdotal experience is that ransomware is such a popular tool with cyber criminals is because it gets the organizations that have been penetrated to take notice quite quickly that there's something wrong. I think if we think about things like, network breaches and data theft and coin miners, they're all sort of like things that we're sort of concerned about. But if somebody was to come to you and say, oh, ransomware, that really makes their hairs stand up in the back of the neck. It is something a lot of people are fearful of having their information taken away from them. That confidentiality, the accessibility of information being scrambled through the art of encryption, but ransomware is still a big thing. So from my own perspective, it doesn't matter who the ransomware operator is, it's just that ransomware is still a tool that we're seeing being used time and time again. But just thinking of the threat chain and where ransomware comes into the picture, it's usually all the way at the end where ransomware is deployed to get people to understand something is going wrong. Network breaches, though, are right on the heels of it. We're seeing a lot of initial access brokers gaining access to an organization just to then sell that access to the next, criminal organization to then go in and do some other unsavory things. And it's pretty telling over the last few years, ransomware is still top performer. Network breaches are still pretty big though. Our data exfiltration coin miners are just bubbling away under the surface, but web shells are interesting, and we'll get onto why they're a little bit interesting too. And just remember, all this information is available in that report on that web page that I've linked to before. But how are they getting access into the environments? What are criminals doing to gain access to the networks that were penetrated and unfortunately taking advantage of? Were they breaking in? Were they logging in? Now, arguably, you could say that these are the same things. Somebody who is logging into my environment that are unauthorized or effectively trespassing and therefore breaking in. But we've differentiated these two things because they do have specific connotations. The breaking in aspect is the use of exploits and vulnerable sort of services to gain access into the environment in an unsanctioned way. Whereas logging in is simply using things like, compromised credentials or brute forcing style of attacks to gain access to a system that they would otherwise not have the access credentials to gain access into. And looking at the data itself, we're seeing a very healthy use of exploits against organizations to gain access into organizational networks. The big takeaway here is that a lot of the organizations that were caught up in a cyber criminal activity in the last couple of years didn't know that these services existed on their network that were exploited against. But year over year, we've seen a very healthy dose of exploits being used to gain access to environments. And I mean, if we even cast our own mind back to the news and the headlines from, well, I don't know where you get your informational security news from, but I know where I do. There's things like, proxy shell, logon shell, log4j, exchange online, exchange on premise. These are all services that many of us use day in, day out that have unfortunately been caught up in having a vulnerability exposed to them. Those criminals weaponizing that activity to then use against us, and then us being sort of caught off guard and then unfortunately having a criminal take advantage of it as well. But compromised credentials are hot on the heels. Roughly 30% of accounts that were caught up in an information security incident last year had compromised credentials used against them. And then there's those third sets of bar charts in the sort of the middle of the screen, the unknown. I'm not happy about how generous the percentages are for that unknown element there. And that unknown in this context here means that we don't know what caused, or what was the intention of the attack, or how the attacker got in. And I'll talk about why that is a big problem in a minute or so. But we can also see things like malicious documents, brute forcing attack, and phishing. Phishing is rife. But when it was sort of like attributed to, were these attacks using phishing to get in, or as opposed to exploits, phishing paled in comparison to exploitation. And I think this is where I want to sort of spend a little bit more of the time discussing where and why these two sort of like first two bar graphs are quite important. Because when we think about the context of breaking in, 55% of the organizations that we had used from this data set, of the remote access that was given to attackers through a vulnerable service, 55% of those services had patches existing for them that would have mitigated that risk. And this is one of the big key takeaways from today that I want everybody to really think about hard. And I know you've probably heard this many times before from a patching standpoint, but patching your stuff is so super critical in this day and age. We are using more services than ever. Our networks are expanding, and the tools and the technologies that we're putting in place are numerous. So it's no surprise that people that are responsible for putting in these tools, then configuring those tools to say utilize them and provide access to your employees to utilize them, maybe start to sort of like not so much look after the feeding and watering. It's mainly a tick in the box, it's done, it's in, it's ready to go. In case in point that we've seen a lot of security gateway devices unfortunately compromised and give cyber criminals full remote access into an organization through a security device. As I said, Exchange, Oracle, Java, Log4j, these types of things. We've seen these vulnerabilities used far and wide many, many, many times again, let alone getting into things like VMware and ESX. Providing, big critical access into environments where protected systems, shouldn't be directly accessed by cyber criminals. So understanding where these services are, understanding where these services are providing access to, and more so defining and questions for you as responsible CISOs to go back to your organizations and ask, are we updating our equipment? As a result of me asking that question, asking for KPIs or measuring KPIs, how frequently are your staff getting back to you and telling you that systems and services that you've published, that you've discovered, are now being adequately looked after? And don't look at a vulnerability that has been released or a threat report that's been released that might say that this particular vulnerability has a 9.8 CVSS score. The relevance is, it's important, but it's more important in context to what you have in your environment. You might have a system that's exposed to the internet with a very low ranking CVE, but could provide remote code execution. That's important. That's super important. So I can understand how hard patching is to sort of take, being mindful of and making sure that the systems and services are updated and kept up to date. But it's always good to keep asking questions about what do we have? Is it being looked after? When was the last time it was patched? Who patched it? Can we validate this against the vendor's recommendation that it should be patched to this version? And then ticking the box and moving on. I guess it's just all about the validation, right? But patch your stuff, super important. But then there's the logging in aspect. And I mean, credential issues stem from the user population, right? I think there's been a lot of issues previously with our carbon-based units, our users themselves. In some cases, we can't trust them as far as we can throw them, but hey, they're the users. They make up the bulk of everything that needs to get done in the organization to get done. But there's a couple of interesting examples in the underground marketplace where credentials are being sold en masse for tens of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, depending on who the target is. Whereas they're then being unsold to very insidious cyber criminals groups to then use to log in as if that they were that person to then bypass. I must admit though, I mean, 30% of these organizations where credentials have been sort of purchased from initial access brokers, a lot of the credential sets were valid and didn't have MFA enabled on them. So that is a big issue here with the logging in, is that there are still plenty of organizations, too many in fact, that we saw in our own analysis through our response services last year, where access to administrative systems that were owned and used by executives didn't have some form of secondary authentication mechanism associated to them. I must admit, there's not many services that are online these days, especially those that are consumed from the cloud, that don't offer multi-factor authentication. In fact, many of them are forcing it on these days. So if there is a service or a high-profile user or a VIP, why aren't the accounts that you're using or they're using to log onto services protected with multi-factor authentication? FIDO2 keys, YubiKeys, passwordless access, biometrics. These are all valid forms of MFA that they should be used in tandem. But another disturbing trend that we've seen starting to emerge, and it sort of tracks along the supply chain compromise angle, is this screenshot on the right-hand side. This is another forum where access to an organizational remote management and monitoring tool is being sold to the highest bidder. Now, a remote management and monitoring tool gives one person in the business the ability to manage all of their assets. So where we traditionally might have used something like group policy and MDM style of facilities to manage our fleets of devices, now that they're all internet connected, RMM tools are starting to come up in popularity, or in lieu of, say, things like Active Directory. And where they can where RMM tools operate as, system authority root on devices, can copy files, can delete files, can change the security configuration of those devices. It is a literal goldmine for attackers to use and abuse to then gain access to a massive amount of not only your devices that might be under the control of an RMM product, but a whole raft of other organizations as well. So you can see how these sorts of services are such a hot topic of focus for attackers. But at the same time, as CISOs, it would be very good to understand if these types of tools are being used in your environment. And I think when we procure these types of tools, or we empower those within our teams to procure these tools, there's some level of implicit trust that we're placing to that company in the cloud or that provider that is going to do the right things by us. So validating their own security controls. Who has access to the super administrative portals? Who can gain access to it? What routes are coming into my business from that tool? Can we monitor it? Can we enforce MFA across these things as well? Are there sort of like, duality of authentication tokens that must be presented before these types of tools can actually utilize or do things across our network? These are all really important questions to ask. Again, it's about validating these tools and how they're used, where they're used, but more importantly, the access control and who has access to those facilities in third parties. Now, I mentioned the unknown elements before and how I wasn't too happy about the fact that there was 17% of organizations that were caught up in our data set that when we conducted our own forensic investigations into, we determined that there was not enough evidence to understand how the attack unfolded, where the attack originated from, what were they targeting, were they successful, what left within the business. And that sort of was attributable to sort of two major scenarios without being, I guess, too specific, if you catch my drift. One of them was more of a knee-jerk reaction. We found in a high percentage of cases that when an organization suffered a breach and realized that they were under attack, they had the knee-jerk reaction to tactically nuke those systems, pull them off the network, format them, re-image them, blow them away, get a new one from backups, whatever it may be, which is, a good testament that they can do that. They can get a new system and restore it from backup. That is a great thing to do. But it was more so the fact that they weren't really following any sort of regimented incident recovery process. By doing that sort of action, they've actually destroyed a whole bunch of supporting evidence that could allow them to answer those questions that I'm sure as you as a CISO would absolutely want to know. How did they get in? What did they take? Where did it go? They're sort of the minimum questions that I would want answered. And if any of us are sitting in the room that are involved with a very governing regulated body like financial services or even health, you've then got regulators coming to you to say, well, because you had a data incident or a breach incident, tell us what was lost. Tell us how they got in. And what are you doing to fix the holes where they came in from? You can't actually answer that question. And that is a big concern for our incident responders, because not only can we not do the job to say and answer those questions, but then there's that big regulatory issue, that compliance issue where they can't answer those bodies as well. So again, when under duress, don't panic, but more so have some sort of formalized plan to understand, well, we're capturing information, we've retained logging information. Why this is important, I'll sort of touch on in a minute. But the other avenue that sort of we found with why with things unknown is because attackers were also able to scrub log files, or the logs were non-persistent, so they were lost. So rather than through an act of destruction by either the attacker or incidental incineration by the person who was responsible for the environment, like the admin just blowing everything away, maybe logging wasn't configured. We found a lot of times that there were logs and not being committed, not being saved, especially on gateway devices. Gateway devices weren't committing their logs to a third-party system for aggregation or a SIM type of system. And that really impacts the ability to go back in time and understand what happened. So again, during an incident response phase, you want all these questions answered, and you want to get the information on what was taken and what wasn't taken and how they did it so you can stop it from the future. Retaining that forensic information is key, but we're still seeing a far too high incident rate where people are just not keeping logs in their environments. Probably what was most concerning though was that data is being stolen. And next to ransomware, which is that first phase of an extortion attempt where the ransomware is demanding you pay bitcoins, organizations are now being contacted by these operators in sort of secondary and even tertiary forms of extortion, so triple extortion. In this case here, we saw 42% of the cases that we investigated, data was successfully exfiltrated. We saw concrete evidence of information being staged in an environment, batched up into a compressed file, and then transported off to a third-party service that is not authorized to have information successfully. So that was pretty concerning. But the great, I guess, the silver lining with those sorts of events, or I guess those particular companies, those investigations that we perform, we could categorically say and confirm that this was the information that was interacted with and stolen. So from an organizational standpoint, they had very clear guidance on what they needed to do next. They need to tell the regulators. They need to declare this as an incident to their customers because they knew if customer information was or was not taken. But then there was another 47% of the cases that we looked into that there was no conclusive evidence that data had been exfiltrated. Again, this was attributable to the fact where information was non-existent or had been purged in an environment that would have otherwise told us this that had happened. For example, there was one particular case where we saw 3 terabytes of information being stored on a domain controller server, which was also acting as a file server. There were PST files, there were database files, there were employment information, the customer database, the list goes on, and even schematics for products that they were designing, which I'll sort of leave it at that. But this multi-terabyte archive was sitting on this DC. There was a copy of a piece of software called rclone, which is a very popular tool for synchronizing information to a cloud environment, which in this case was an unsanctioned cloud provider that had been introduced to this network through the attacker. But there was no logs in the gateway systems of those particular devices that would show data transfer had happened. So we can assume that 3 terabytes of information had been stolen, but there was no concrete evidence to say how far did they get? Did they get all the parts of the archive? Did they get none of it? Did they get all, there's just too many questions as a remainder. So it's still close to 90% of organizations had information stolen. And if we look at the flip side, the tail end of the graph is pretty telling. You'll see on the report, only 1.32% of organizations that we looked into did not categorically have data stolen. So as an attacker, their main motivators are to get in, maintain access, and steal information. If they're already in, it's more than likely that they've staged information to take it away. How much? I don't know, but that is their primary objective, to at least extort you for that information and make sure that you don't release it, or they don't release it. As we get to the tail end of the presentation and a bit of a summarization of those 3 sort of points that we've sort of covered off, when we're looking at the incidents over the last year, whether they're breaking in or logging in, there's a sheer interest with information that would sort of correlate that cyber criminals are breaking into organizations. They're finding too many open windows, pun intended, or insecure configurations that are allowing the attackers to simply exploit through public information and then have their way with the network like they'd owned it. Yes, people are still logging in, And we're still seeing a big chunk of organizations falling victim to things like credential reuse or implicit trust in third-party services. Not using multi-factor authentication is a big issue. So from a user behavioral type of aspect, understanding users and getting them to understand and helping them to understand how to best use passwords, not to reuse passwords, have some form of a password manager, and also implement some form of multi-factor authentication, because it's usually free to turn this stuff on when it comes to third-party services that are in the cloud. Even things like through Azure AD, multi-factor authentication is now pretty much all mandatory when you're logging into services. As I said, the big unknown, well, don't make it an unknown. Make it something that you can concrete understand, and you can tell a story if something does happen. Is be ready. Have those log files, and it might seem trivial and so rudimentary to running a successful cybersecurity business. But if you want to have those ideal cybersecurity outcomes, is to log stuff. Create, a process of taking critical events and information from your environment and correlating them to the one source, to a SIM, to a data lake. These are just pretty trivial things that we'd expect everybody to do, but in some cases, organizations are being caught out. But there is no need to panic. And I guess this is sort of like the tail end now, we understand that security is hard. I mean, we've been on the coalface. We know exactly what happens when there is a cybersecurity event. The fact that we need to, have so many different types of tooling and technologies and processes in play to ensure that our environment stays secure and protected against cyber criminals. But we know that it's a double-edged sword. Those tools are somewhat complex at times and can be very overwhelming with the information that they're sending back to you that they want you to do something about. And if you're looking to find people to do this for you, a security team in your business, I get it. Everybody wants to do it themselves, but finding the right people, training those people, and then retaining them. I know in my part of the world, that's exceptionally hard right now. Cyber skills shortage is a real thing. This is where we can help. This is one aspect of what Sophos is doing these days, is we've turned a lot of our products and solutions into a service. So not only can our tools and technologies be had on subscription, but we're wrapping up our managed detection and response service around them. So we take all that information, that logging information, that event information, things that would seem suspicious in an environment, we're actively watching them. We're understanding where things could be insecurely configured or misconfigured or unpatched. And we're advising you to say, hey, these need to change because this could allow the attackers in. But if we do detect some erroneous activity, some surreptitious activity may be starting to form, we can immediately react to that. We can shut them down, we can investigate, and we can resolve those issues before, minutes pass, which is a lot better than allowing the attacker to have their way with your environment, and then all of a sudden you've got a full-blown security incident on your hands. And we all do this through our own technologies and solutions, as I say. I mean, our Sophos Managed Detection and Response is built on our XDR platform, which is quite cool. But the best thing about the actual service platform itself is that, yes, we can ingest information from ourselves and our own products, but we're now starting to ingest information from third-party services and products. So competing anti-malware products, competing firewall products, a variety of identity and access management, network detection and response tools, and the multitude of clouds that are available today. We can ingest information from so many different toolings and paint a very clear picture of what's actually going on in an environment before it becomes a problem, and cut any big issues off before they do raise up. And this is all made possible via our Sophos XOps and Sophos Labs. We've got a lot of application of artificial intelligence and already up in our platforms and products already. And we're just trying to deploy that as a service to everybody that will listen to us, really. Now, we're very, very confident with our services and our platform that if you do things the right way, if you're taking on the recommendations, if you're applying those security, you're breeding good security culture, if you do have a security incident, there is up to a $1 million breach protection warranty on offer too. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. We want to make sure that our customers are as confident in us, because we are wanting to make sure that the outcomes that you have from a cybersecurity standpoint are good. You build a healthy cybersecurity culture, and that you can get on with doing things in business and enabling more and expanding without having to worry too much about, whether the next piece of ransomware is going to take advantage of you. Now, I'm going to wrap it up there for now. I would like to hand it back over to Vikas for the Q&A session, and I really look forward to any questions that you have got for me this afternoon.
Sounds good, Aaron. Very interesting presentation as always. Thanks for that. So floor is open for Q&A, guys. Please go ahead, raise your hand, and I will unmute you. The first question is coming from Mr. Tejveer. Tejveer, you can unmute yourself now. Go ahead, please. Tejveer, you can ask your question now.
Thank you, Vikas. Thanks, Aaron. Very good insights. Really appreciate you sharing all of those. One quick question, and that actually is on the last slide that you shared, the one prior to the last slide. Fundamentally, if you look at enterprises like us, over a period of time, we have invested a lot on various technologies, various platforms, various products, and various services from different partner organizations. Looking at that, how is it that Sophos plans to ensure investment protection and a heterogeneous environment which is supported by you to cater to our requirements?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. From a transparency standpoint, it does bring forward the breach protection warranty and the good old terms and conditions that are associated with it. Look, when it comes to being able to respond at this point in time to a threat in real time, we would prefer that our Sophos Intercept X protection products are actually deployed across the endpoints. So part of the licensing is that we give you those endpoint protection products to then deploy across your fleet of Windows, Mac, Linux, and cloud services, so that if there is a problem that does start to form, then we can spring into action and use that tooling to provide some form of live response. We can dial into those systems and lock them down, tighten up security configurations to contain or kick out and neutralize the attacker before they become a problem. There is the ability for us to ingest information from say, Microsoft Defender. But time and time again, if you look to say things like the SE Labs, like efficacy reports, where they don't rate, say, Microsoft protections at a default level as being as comprehensive as, say, somebody like Sophos, we would hate to sort of see that product in play and let an attack unfold that really does sort of start to, sort of eat into our warranty sort of terms and conditions. But I understand where you're coming from. There are terms about it. But yeah, we would like you to see using our solutions. We license you for those solutions with our service, but at the very least, we can blend in with a heterogeneous environment. It's just the terms and conditions of the warranty do drastically change.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron.
Great, sounds good. Let's go to the next question. Mani, you go ahead and unmute yourself. You can ask your question now.
Hey, very good morning, Aaron. Great data points and great insights to do with, and Vikas, thanks for organizing such insightful session with. This is more of a comment, right? So Aaron, you started with the analysis of the various incidents you guys handled with, and then concluded with that again whether it is a break-in or it is a login. So fundamentally it revolves around the hygiene of how do we really do things with, right? We'll let it be on vulnerability management as the practice, and then the implementing the right authentication mechanisms. So those two are the major contributors. My question is more aligned with that. Since you do the MDR, any practices which helps on the human intensive nature of the vulnerability remediation program, and how it has been handled with the less human intensive area of remediation. Because this is a cycle, okay? This is an accepted cycle that we always find vulnerability, we always patch those things, and it become a constant cycle. So how differently you guys do as part of MDR?
Yeah, from ours, it's just about taking stock, and a lot of the victims that were part of the data set they were looking at, they weren't performing any form of vulnerability assessment in their environment, let alone basic hygiene into understand the systems and services that were exposed to the internet to patch them. So from a risk register standpoint, they really didn't have this stuff registered, right? So from our side of things is when we're doing our initial onboarding and we're doing a bit of discovery in the environment, we're using, say, a lot of public resources like Census and Shodan and our own, I guess, gateway analysis techniques to understand your digital footprint. And if we spot something that might not be on your risk register, if you're willing to share that information with us, then we can say, hey, we've discovered this RDP gateway, or there's this obscure, VPN service that's sitting over there that's tied to your public IPv4 addresses. We need to make sure that is patched. And then that sort of should spawn sort of like that activity with you. So from a vulnerability assessment, we're not as, I guess, reactive when it comes to sort of like running assessments than looking for issues. For us, we're more about taking the data points and the information of what's actually happening on those devices from somebody's trying to log in, maybe they're trying to brute force, or there's some erroneous PowerShell activity or lolbin abuse on these systems. These are big indicators that something has gone horribly wrong, which will usually lead us back to, this is how they got in. And that might be a shock, how they get in, or oh yeah, we knew that was there, but we thought it was patched. It wasn't a patch. Why wasn't it patched? For whatever reason. So the vulnerability assessment sort of is slightly different. We're not using sort of like a commercial off-the-shelf tool to do it. We're using actual discovery and activity in the environment to understand where risk and exposure lie, if that helps.
Got it. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Manny.
Great, sounds good. We still have time, like 20 minutes, guys. So if you want to ask more questions, please raise your hand. And I see there are a couple of questions in chat, and the first one was from Jackie. So Jackie, I have unmuted you. Maybe you want to ask the live question. Go ahead and ask that. Instead of me reading it, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is alarming that credentials are compromised credential is alarming because many are incidents happening because of that. And as per your statistics, the phishing attacks has been decreased from 2021 to 2022. So I am surprising like how they are managing, how they are sniffing the credentials, or the seller who's selling the credentials, how they get. Any idea about that?
Yeah, I've got some pretty compelling evidence. So there have been so many high profile breaches of large public data sets over the last, say, 3 to 5 years. And you'd think sort of like a data breach from 5 years ago, what relevance does it have now? But we found that a lot of the information that is in these public leaks, a lot of the credential sets that are in these leaks are still valid. So where we've got people that might drift from job to job, maybe their email address changes, but their passwords, they reuse them. So we're still finding, and this is what hackers are really good at doing. They're really good at building a list of usernames and passwords, and then using social engineering, or I guess open source intelligence techniques, they're able to siphon information off, say, LinkedIn and so forth, and say, oh, Vikas has moved from this organization to Elite CISOs. Well, let's just transpose his email address. Let's sort of do some rearranging of what we think, vikas.aurora@elitecisos.in would be. Oh, and this password is the same, and they've logged in. So attackers don't need to really work too hard to build databases of credentials by phishing them, because I guess through user awareness and anti-phishing techniques, they're becoming a little bit better. Now, ChatGPT has changed this, which is a different kettle of fish. So there is a lot of long-standing open databases of dumps on the internet that just give attackers a very quick leg up over a lot of corporate infrastructure and able to just simply discover credentials because they're already there. There's services from a guy called Troy Hunt, haveibeenpooned.com, and he runs an information site where you can punch in an email address or a domain and see if that has been caught up in a data breach. And I tend to get all of my attendees to webinars to go to this website and run a test against it. Don't submit any passwords, but just see what data breaches you've been caught up in the past, because it is quite enlightening. And people like LinkedIn, Twitter recently, Dropbox, Microsoft, Amazon, they've all had credentials stolen from them in the past. So I just be mindful that maybe it's time to sort of conduct a little bit of research of your own for your own organization, for the own domains that you have. Thanks for bringing that up and chucking in an email address, or I should say entering an email address, aaron.bugal, and just see what sites are opening. But about my address there, if you get aaron.bugal, Oh, here we go. Putting in an email address. We're going to see if this has been caught up on anything. Live demos. This is a test. No Cornish phone. Great. If it was to come up in red, if you were to say type in my email address, which has been in existence of 20 years, there's been a whole heap of breaches that I've been caught up in. Now, I've changed my password many times, and I don't use the same password for any one service once because I use a password manager. But a lot of our users in an organisation, they're still using the same passwords that they've had for the same amount of years for different services. So this is largely how this is happening. There you go. Animal Jam. That was my kids. But I signed up for an account for my kids. Adobe back in 2013. Cove, that was a big one too. But if you scroll down, there's a few more. Dropbox. I was a Dropbox customer. LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn proficiently. Online Spambot, which was a conglomerate list. But there you go. Like an email address that is long time around, or even new users, turns up in many dumps. And these dumps are all been publicly available for sale. Raid Forums doesn't exist now, but you can go download these dumps for a couple of dollars and start searching for passwords. Anyway, I think I answered that question.
Yeah, good one. Somesh, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for wonderful insights and wonderful session. And thank you, Vikas, for arranging it. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to concise it in one. So we are using Sophos XDR extensively. Sometimes what happens, like we need to investigate more and we need sandboxes. I was looking like I was thinking like, should I go to another? Should I buy another service or something? Or it's part of the XDR services? Number one. Number two, MDR, like there are, I understand that MDR services are there, but most of the folks are already having some kind of services outsourced and all these, right? So in that condition, what should be the path to switch to a single consolidated platform like Sophos? So that's going to be second question. If time permits, you can answer. Otherwise, first question is quite simple and I think easy to answer.
So you're looking for a sandbox. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, so I just want to know, like, I believe the XDR solution should have the sandboxes. Like, if I want to analyze any file which is malicious, I should be able to investigate out of the box through the platform rather than going to some other tool, analyzing it and taking action, right?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I mean, Sophos Labs, we have a piece of technology called Intellix. And Intellix is our detonation service, our sandbox service, if you will. And we've been using this for our products, Sophos XDR, Sophos Central Email on our Sophos XGS firewall. So it's everywhere as a detonation service. But what we're about to do, well, we have done it now through APIs, is that you can utilize the Intellix platform yourself. There is a free usage tier if you're a tier. So it's an Amazon subscribed product, and up to a certain number of queries and detonations are free. But over that, it's cents on the dollar. Now we're about to open up and release a web interface. So if you're familiar with things like VirusTotal, Joe's Sandbox, Any Runs, Last Line, they're sort of public-facing sandbox services. We will have our service as well. So all the intelligence that we have from our customer, for our partners, and also the information from Sophos Labs, we're now going to start reflecting that back in a product we call Sophos Intellix. So it's available from api.sophos.com, api.labs.sophos.com is the actual, I think that's the address. I can put in the chat. But we are about to enter this into what we call public release candidate. So at the moment, you have to be a Sophos employee, or you have to have a Sophos ID as a partner to use it. But we're about to sort of team this up with your Sophos MyCentral account so that you can log in and use this to, well, detonate payloads from a malware research perspective.
Okay. So currently, we are very much dependent on the Sophos. We need to create the support ticket, and that's the lengthy life cycle of that. Anyway, yep.
This will take that away from it, so you'll be able to do this yourself directly very soon. But you are able to use the APIs to do that now. What was the second question, Somesh? I missed that second part.
Okay, Vikas.
Yeah, go ahead.
Allowed. Okay. So the thing is, like, I also got contacted by the Sophos representative, sales representative for MDR services. I like that as well. But most of the time, what we have already some SIM we are already using, some kind of services are already used, right? So what's the path if I want to consolidate all my security tool into one platform under one umbrella, right? What should be the path? That's what the thing I think you should highlight, or I am not sure if any link I can read. So path means like it's not possible to cut off as of now, right, today itself, and switch it to this one. There must be some path. There are investment already made. There must be some path, and slowly, like how can I see the value of money, return on investment, and all those?
Yeah, the short answer, I'll try to keep this short, is that if there is a lot of investment, existing investment that has time to run in your environment because of contractual reasons, we can come in and deploy our MDR service using just sensors. So we can rely on the telemetry and the activity that those incumbent products are seeing, but we can still ingest that into our data lake and provide you guidance when we see security issues arise, which from my experience has been a really good use case, because it shows that the tools and technologies that you have in place, they may be good, but the processes that we're wrapping over the top of them are giving you exceptional insight. We're actually using the tools to their fullest. But when it comes to, as I said, the breach protection warranty, or being able to stop things like very pervasive ransomware attacks before they even get a chance to be delivered to your environment, this is where you can then say, well, at the end of those contractual periods of those incumbent products, we can flick our sensor over into what we call intercept X mode. We can remove the incumbent products and leave our software and technologies in place to provide remedial actions. So there is I guess, a transitional path available. There's a lot more to it to that, but just in the interest of time, you're probably better off speaking to your sales representative, but better yet, getting a sales engineer over to actually have a really good conversation with you and your team, because they'll paint a very clear picture for you.
Sure.
Great, sounds
Thank
good. Let's move to next question. Gururaz, please unmute yourself and you can ask your question now. If not, Gururaj, Aditya, you can ask your question.
Sure. Aaron, one of the difficulty that we face is when we are taking this up to a board level, assuming that we are going to enroll or we want to get an FDR service. And since we have outsourced some part of our SOC to external vendor, how would you justify the cost avoidance? For example, whatever that we are doing with respect to vulnerability scanning or SIEM product that we are having, or if there's a maintenance of certain things, or we are maintenance of SIEM, or let's say IDS signatures that we are maintaining or doing a maintenance on, or let's say the network engineers who are right now working on this thing. So how would you justify to the board from the pricing perspective, and what would be the typical pricing model that would have to? I know this would be a larger discussion, but from an example perspective, if you can just work this out, that would be beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, it's very. I must suggest that the answer to this question, it's difficult. It's hard to go up to a board who may not understand why there's a need for more control or more procedural investment over and above, say, the controls that you've already put in place. But I guess it comes down to, you mentioned all of these different aspects and controls and processes already that are in play, but you're still drawing concern because of maybe, heightened increased risk activity in the environment. I guess the most success that I've had at board levels when it comes to sort of like, I guess, pitching an MDR service is to really sort of discuss the risks associated with running the SOC in-house. I mean, maybe you've got some great people in your environment, but maybe not all the tools. Or vice versa, you've got some really good tools, but you're concerned about the people that you've got that are writing IDS rules, maintaining cloud environments, maybe deploying, and doing all of the aggregation when it comes to SIEM. If they happen to move on, what risk does that bring increase into the business? And this is where the MDR service acts as sort of like I hate to use the word like a guarantee, or as a stopgap for those sort of shortfalls in your own processes and procedures in the business. So purely from we're going to be good at stopping threats, it's more so from a risk standpoint. As risk swells in an organization, and it ebbs and flows, it contracts and it increases based on, seasonal events even, right? Or situations where people leave the business, the MDR service is there just to keep that constant waterline of security in play, regardless of what might be happening under the surface. So I've had a really good beneficial discussions using that type of analogy with organizations, and it has helped, but it also, well, how can we prove it? And I guess this is where, we look to our technologies, we look to deploying our sensors. So as a bit of an evaluation, deploying our sensors, which are totally passive, which will take information from the current security systems and services, and I guess, end-to-end evaluate how processes are in a business and paint a picture of where there might be misses. If we start to see nefarious activity tick up, well, why didn't the IDS or why didn't these security people pick this up? Not to wrap them and make an example of them, but more so to say, hey, we're missing something here. Sophos has picked it up. We've now got concrete evidence that we can use them to ensure that our services remain secure moving forward. But great question. I really like that, Aditya. Thank you.
Cool. Let's go to the last question now. So, yeah, Aditya, you are saying something?
Yeah. I just said that if, as for Somesh mentioned, that if you can provide us the path for us with respect to how we're going to move from our existing, how we're going to transition the path to move from the existing in-house SOC or outsourced SOC to one single platform, that would be really nice. I mean, I would be interested in knowing that also.
Yeah, I will definitely follow up with you there. We'll get some in-country representatives to have a talk, because then we can make that very clear for you.
Cool, sounds good. So let's take last question. We only have 5 minutes left. So got a short question and short answer. Go ahead, Gaurav, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Vikas, and thanks, Aaron, for the session. And my question goes back to one of your slides where you mentioned that the actual time to acknowledge, contain, and mitigate the threat is around 38 minutes, right? And that is really impressive. And if that includes your also metrics from phishing operations perspective, or the threats that arises from your phishing, that is really impressive. And my question is probably towards that only. Like, suppose you look at an industry or a company or where almost there are 1 lakh employees. So you're typically looking at a queue of around 200 to 300 email reports per day, right? How do you get to that time of around 38 minutes or 40, especially where the reports vary from malicious, non-malicious, or just misreports or something like that? Would you enlighten me about this?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned 200 to 300, say, reports a day, which is a phenomenal workload for your security people. And just to keep it brief, we see 100 times that. We from our own telemetry, from our own products, our own spam traps and lab operations, we've seen so much over the course of the last 30 odd years that we've learned so much for it. In the last sort of half a dozen years, our artificial intelligence, our deep learning, our data science team have made great inroads into being able to determine what is and what is not spam or phishing using artificial intelligence. I'm going to say it. So we've been very good. We've been pioneers in the industry. We've literally published the book on deep learning models for identifying malware and phishing payloads. And this is how we do it in our own SOC. So we use a lot of pre-filter activity with Sophos artificial intelligence to take away that legwork. And the things that are right on the borderline, that's when we get the humans involved with our own managed detection and response service. So if we're ingesting information from our own products, Microsoft Office 365, Proofpoint, whatever it might be, we can see all that information and we can learn from it. But it's a great question, and this is what we've been able to sort of get those response times right down.
Awesome. So that was the last question. Great session, Aaron, as always. An amazing question. So we planned it well, right? Half an hour session and then a lot of questions. So that's great. That's cool. So 2 minutes, let me rush the closing now. So guys, thank you for taking out time and joining this session. If you want a participation certificate, which is blockchain based verifiable certificate, what you can do is go to Elite CISO's website, go to events and click on upcoming events. Instead of clicking the CP certificate under Aaron's very nice picture, what you do is click on this link over here, this CP certificate, because this link is not correct, right? So click on this CP certificate link. This will take you to a Razorpay payment page. It is a nominal fee of 100 rupees that agency charges for blockchain based certificates. So if you want, fill that up, and then by evening or by tomorrow, you will get your certificate over email. And since you are already here, maybe you want to register for this excellent workshop, which is coming up over a weekend of 27th and 28th of May. So we have been running various workshops as well, which are online apart from the Thursday webinars, right? I think this is our 5th or 6th workshop of this year, 5th workshop, I believe. And the trainer is highly experienced in this domain. He's got more than 25 years of experience. And the topic is around cyber resiliency, right? So how do you test the resiliency in your enterprise? So very discounted training, only 3,500 rupees for members. So you can go ahead and register for that. If you are not member, maybe you want to apply for membership, and it is only for corporate CIOs and CISOs. So if you're corporate CIO, CISO, if you're not Elite CISO member, go to the website, click on membership and fill this form. Last but not the least, that everybody is kind of waiting for is the Wheel of Fortune. So the giveaway is a very nice Wonder Chef Nutri blender. That's what we are giving away this time. And so you see that all the people who registered, 248 people registered, their name are here, right? All the registered names. I will spin it. If your name comes, go to the chat and say yes, and we will keep on spinning this till we find the winner. So here goes the first one. Mr. Om Prakash, if you are there, go to the chat and say yes. Mehul Bhai, could you please monitor the chat and see if somebody says yes on that? I'm spinning it one more time. Let's see. Mr. Ashish from Tata Technologies. Third one for all members who registered, Mr. Ramesh. Now what I'm going to do is, if there is nobody in this, there is no winner, I'm going to remove all these and I'm going to put only the people who supported Elite CISO's LinkedIn post, and we will spin it for them now. So see, only 33 people posted after filtering it out. So hopefully your name will come, right? You should be here. So let's see. The first one goes to Mr. Raja from Chennai. I think Mr. Raja is there in this session. So if you are there, go to the chat and say yes. Spinning for the second one. Eldrin, Mr. Eldrin, if you are there, go to the chat and say yes. It's already 12:01, so I gotta rush it a bit. And the third one goes to Mr. Kamal from Delhi chapter. Mehul Bhai, did we find anyone yet?
Yeah, Eldrin is there.
Okay, just one, right?
Yes.
Okay, should I keep on spinning, guys? What do you say? Maybe one more minute.
Raja is also there. Raja is also there. He mentioned
so
yes.
Two are gone. Two are gone, right? Only one left.
Yes.
Okay, and let me spin one more time, maybe. So, okay, let's see. Mr. Amit Tomar. Mr. Amit, I do not see him yet. Amit is there.
Yes,
awesome.
He's there.
Great. So all three are gone. Great. Thank you very much, guys, for joining. We are just 2 minutes late, but it's okay. We can manage that. So guys, ping me on WhatsApp with your address, or maybe just ping me hi, hello, and I will get in touch with you guys. Okay, for the gift. With this, thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.